Let's start the show by talking about my sponsor, Paloma Verde, and their new website, palomaverdecbd.com. Head over to palomaverdecbd.com and check them out for all of your CBD needs. They've got the gummies, tinctures, salves. So if you're needing anything to maybe chill you out, something to help you get mellowed out, something for your joint pain and stiffness, go over to palomaverdecbd.com and give them a check out. Carlos and Vanessa are awesome people. They run a great company. And if you enter the promo code FACTS at checkout, you'll get 25% off your order. Plus, any order over $75, you get free shipping. So, I don't know what you're waiting for. Head over to palomaverdecbd.com and check them out. Let's start the show. This episode will be completely taken out of context. Welcome to the Fact Check This podcast. Fact Check This podcast, episode 70, and today I'm rejoined by Giles Miller. You remember Giles from a few months ago where our initial conversation where we went into religion and politics and how the two kind of intertwine, and then we came back and we did a full in-depth analysis of the Easter holiday and how that works in the actual Jewish calendar and like the Christian tradition of that. And with that conversation, we got to talking a little bit about the actual timing of the birth of Jesus, which got me thinking about how we celebrate Christmas and also, because we were talking about Easter at the time, how we celebrate Easter and some of the original pagan traditions that come from those, or that those holidays are kind of rooted in. Because I'm sure you hear it regularly from atheist or anti-religious friends or just acquaintances or whatever. Anytime we come around to Christmas or Easter, they always throw out, well, that came from a pagan holiday. Those are all pagan traditions. I'm like, yes, I'm not a moron. I actually study these things. Would you like to talk about that? Which they never want to talk about it. They just want to try to throw it in your face that it's not actually a Christian tradition, that it was stolen from something else. So I got three that I wanted to look at today because there are certain Christian traditions that these three holidays are kind of center around. So we've got Yule, which is Christmas, and then we've got Ostara, which is Easter, and then we've got Samhain, which is All Hallows Day or Halloween, which are all, so Halloween is depending on how strict your religious views are. You may not celebrate Halloween, but it does have Christian traditions tied into it historically. And there are, it is a day of remembrance for the Christian church. So, some of the more extremely conservative sects of Christianity may not observe Halloween and view it as like a satanic holiday or whatever, but traditionally it is a Christian holiday. So which one of them do you want to dig into first?
Well, man, I mean, whichever one you want. I actually didn't know about the Halloween one. That one, I know that it's about like Samhain and All Hallows Eve and that stuff. My dad was a horror author, so we always celebrated Halloween. But yeah, I didn't know any of that, so I'm excited to dig into it, and I can sort of take some of the things that I know about the Bible and about just the holiday in general and try to piece things together as you go through it. So
okay, well let's hit that one first then.
Sure.
So the theme around Samhain and the pagan tradition of that is it's like the end of so it falls at the end of October, beginning of November. It's kind of the end of the harvest season. It's when everything is kind of dying. So it's the coming to the end of the cycle, so to speak. And it, and everything in the pagan traditions kind of go in that secular, or it goes through the life cycle. You go from birth to death, and that's the way their calendar and their holidays kind of all play out. And so this one is it's the end of the harvest season. It is the death. and it's also a time of remembrance for honoring their ancestors, like honoring the dead, stuff like that. So that's where the pagan traditions kind of come into play, and so like you get the jack-o'-lanterns actually began with that pagan tradition. They would leave the old they would leave like old melons and gourds and stuff out, and they would put candles in them in like an honoring and a remembrance of their ancestors. So that's where the jack-o'-lantern tradition came from. And I'm not as
I thought the jack-o'-lantern came from, wasn't there like an Irish guy or maybe an English guy that had all these things going on, and he needed a light to like light his way through the underworld or something?
see that I'm not sure of.
That might just be some of the old horror stories my dad would tell me, blending in with what I know.
That's
Yeah.
possible. See, for a good Christian, I've spent probably too much time studying the pagan traditions on some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. I like looking at that kind of stuff because I want to be informed on like where that stuff came from. But yeah, I think what you're talking about, I think that is I think that's the Christian connection to the holiday. Is
Got it.
like that's where the Christian stories of it kind of come into play. Because like with the pagan traditions, it's not really an underworld, so to speak. That would come from the Christian side of it. Yeah, so that's kind of the big takeaway with it, and kind of taking the honoring of the ancestors and the celebration, because in some ways that's sort of what it is it's a celebration of death. And so the Christian church kind of incorporated that in and made it the All Saints Day, where you celebrate the saints, and instead of it being particularly a celebration of death, it's an honoring and a remembrance time. They take like the natural seasonal type things out of it and make it more of about the church and the saints and all of that. So that's where
Interesting.
So that's where Halloween and Samhain kind of have their intermingling. But
Got it. Yeah, because death is pretty well condemned in the Bible. It's never like, I don't know. I don't want to say glorified, but it's often really sort of pushed down as a bad thing.
Right.
Like God's not the author of death, and all these little things that are sort of pieced in, that death is an enemy. I think it says that too. So
whereas for paganism and like those old religions like that, as if Christianity isn't old at this point, but in the entire timeline of humanity, it is fairly young. I mean,
yeah, it's pretty. That's fair.
So if when you look at it as far as that goes, regardless of whether you look at humanity through the evolutionary perspective of we've been around for millions of years, or you look at it through the more like young Earth Christian perspective, that it's only been around for tens of thousands of years, or somewhere in between, wherever it falls, Christianity is still only a couple thousand years old, and right. All of these others existed for a very long time prior to that. So, and in a lot of those older traditions and older religions, death is not necessarily given that negative stigma that it kind of gets in the Christian church. It's a little more of a celebrated type of thing, because it is part of the natural cycle of how the world works, and especially for paganism, like I said, it's all cyclical. It goes with the seasons of the birth and growth and producing fruit, and then death, and so they give that a place of honor within their traditions, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I mean, I don't have a fear of death, and I don't really put a negative stigma on death. I never know how to respond when someone dies, because as far as I'm concerned, that is the ultimate outcome of life, is death. So I guess I view it in a different way, and maybe that's just the way I'm wired or whatever. But I kind of like looking at Samhain and Halloween and the traditions and like the base of them, the foundations of those, and kind of where that is, because it is an important part of the life cycle of everything.
Yeah, I see that. I am incredibly affected by death. It's weird too, because like just to sort of expose a lot of the weird things about me, but I'm fascinated by death. But I find it incredibly depressing, and grief is really difficult to deal with. My dad died of cancer a couple years ago, and he was diagnosed in September and died in December. So it's really quick. And so the idea, and I don't consider anything like that personally like a part of life's experience to watch my dad fucking wither away, excuse my language, but wither away and be dead, and then now my entire family's all grief stricken and everything. I do consider death to be an enemy, and I think that because I believe in that Bible thing, that it's a I don't want to say a perversion, but it's moving away from the original sort of design of life, at least as far as humans are concerned, and I just feel like things must be more life focused. But certainly death is it's not important to consider and to think about, because it is a part of our experience for now. And I think that one day Jesus will come back, and won't have to worry about the death thing anymore. At least I won't. And that'll be cool. But until that happens, which is probably not going to be anytime soon, we're going to have to sort of deal with it and get used to it, as weird as that sounds. But yeah, I don't take it well. whenever even if I hear about people dying, one of the weird things about me, as far as like my like libertarian leanings and stuff like that, is I feel like even though I grew up in a very like conservative household, both of my parents are in the military, very like pro-America, pro-military thing, from a very early age, I was always anti-war, because death has just always so like emotionally affected me. And so it was a real easy jump over to this new thing that we're doing, because I hate death so much. And whenever people are like, oh, this is how we get our freedom, especially today, Memorial Day, people are like, this is the reason that we have our freedom, is because we sent all these kids over to go die. And I just completely disagree. And it's weird too, because I've just always had that sort of inclination, and so it's nice to sort of have some of that confirmed, being a little bit more educated on war and everything now. But death is really gnarly.
Well, then, moving away from the celebration of death, you want to look at Yule, which is
Christmas.
In Christian tradition, Christmas, and some of the this one's a little easier one, because I think it's a little more prevalent. It's the one that I think it's the one that gets brought up the most frequently.
Right next to Easter.
Right. Like,
Probably more than Easter, though.
Yeah, I think it does get brought up more than Easter, just because it is so
It's more
very
inclusive.
clearly not when Jesus was born. Like I
Yeah.
don't think there are a whole lot of Christians, if any, who are actually very studied in any way that would argue that December 25th is actually Jesus's birthday. It's just the time of year that we celebrate it, and and it's a convenient time of year to celebrate it, in that it is Yule is the holiday of rebirth. It's the new year. It's hope. It's moving forward. It's kind of the winter solstice. So we've hit our peak of the winter, and we're going to move forward towards spring. So it's like the hope of what's to come. And so in my opinion, it's a very strategic place to put Christmas, with Christmas being the birth of Jesus and the hope of everything. So let's dig into Yule a little bit, because that's like I said, that's one that I think that's the one that's the most well recognized across all spectrums. Is Yule and Christmas go hand in hand, and we're pretty clearly one was co-opted for the other.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I believe it was Constantine, right?
I think that's right.
In like 300 something AD, it wasn't 25 AD, but like in the 300s AD, where he was, so he sort of bought into the whole Christianity thing, or at least saw like how he could use it as a tool to push his power, which is what he did with it. And we see that too, like the picture that we have of Jesus, the white guy, long hair and all that, that was all originally based on early art of Constantine himself. So the idea that the white Jesus that we all think about now is early art adopted from what he looked like. And sun worship was really prevalent around the time. So in a lot of the old art of Jesus, which was Constantine, you have the sun behind the head because of the sun worship. And then of course that changed into the halo that we all recognize now, and that's all born in sun worship, which is that sort of that pagan world. And I think that he probably realized, I can catch at least maybe some more flies with honey than with vinegar. So if converting all these people, because not only did Christianity or Christ affect the world, but that story was affected by the world. So sort of like when water mixes with dirt, you sort of get this mud. In that yeah, if I convince all these pagans that the things that they celebrate are really just the same as the things that I celebrate, getting them to convert over would be really easy. And I think that, yeah, strategically, probably was thinking, okay, the winter thinking about all the different pagan holidays, right? The winter solstice being one of the really big ones. What does that sort of blend into as far as the, Christianity story? And I think that, yeah, I think it was strategically placed there. As far as most people knowing that Jesus wasn't born then, in the church at least, I don't know that I would agree. I think that it's one of those lies that is told so often that its heresy really sort of goes unnoticed with a lot of people, even people that are more educated, whether they be like the pastors or a youth pastor or whatever. It gets really easy to, once you say one thing so often, even if in the back of your head you're like, oh, it's probably something different, you start to sort of convince yourself of it, of it being true, and where it's clearly not.
I guess I can kind of see that. Like maybe I was raised a little bit different, and
You probably were. So was I.
We actually look at things from a intellectual standpoint, not just from a blind obedience standpoint, which is probably where some of my more anarchist tendencies tend to come from. Is you want to analytically look at things, not just accept things for what they are. So I guess maybe for me, I was brought up different, so I did kind of know that stuff and had
Yeah,
a
I knew
better
that stuff as a kid. I never had the transition of going from this misinformation to like a new set. My dad started me immediately, like, my dad didn't even really believe in celebrating Christmas. One, he because Christmas has historically been a Catholic holiday, and so he would teach me about all the evils of Catholicism and the stuff that they would do and how cannibalism is condemned biblically. But with Christmas, you do at Mass, right? You do the transubstantiation where the cracker literally, and I'm not making this up, you can check it out, transubstantiation, but they believe that it literally becomes the body of Christ as you're eating it, like legitimately, and which is cannibalism, clearly. And they believe that the wine also transfers into the literal blood of Christ. And so he was always like, nah, that's not, we're not into doing any of that. And on top of that, all the like funny pagan things that have infiltrated the Christmas time, like the Christmas tree, right, being a fertility symbol to the god Nimrod, the fertility god Nimrod, and because it's the evergreen, it never loses its color. And the fertility, it's a phallic symbol. The Christmas tree is a phallic symbol that you decorate with balls, which is hilarious. And that's what it's rooted in. And so my dad was like, I'm not into having the tree. I don't, we don't really want any part of this. And my dad, biblically was like, there are no more holy days anyway. So if I want to get somebody a gift, I'm going to get them a gift whenever I want to. I'm not beholden to a particular day, or anything like that. So yeah, I never grew up with any of that like misunderstanding. So to me, it seems so weird that people would actually believe any of that stuff. But I've been to church, in a few different states and with a couple different versions, and that's what they believe. So
and like you were talking about, like everything about the holiday for the Christian church was completely co-opted from the pagan tradition of Yule. Like the colors that we use, those were the traditional pagan Yule colors, the reds and the greens. Excuse me, all of that stuff. The evergreen and like the winter flora, which the pagan cultures were very rooted in nature anyway. So for those to be like natural parts of the earth and that time of year, obviously they would use those. And then like now we have the Christmas wreath, and they took all of the Christian church took all of the symbols, like you said, like the tree and everything, and they redefined them with certain characteristics for how it fits into the Christian religion. There's like a real specific story of what the Christmas tree stands for in the Christian tradition of Christmas, and I can't remember what it is because like I know the pagan tradition, and I never really paid attention to it as anything more than just a co-opting. We put up a tree every year, and it's whatever. It's more for the kids than anything. But I understand what the true roots of it are, and so I never put forth a whole lot of time or effort to check out what the Christian justification of the tree was. Do you have that handy? I don't.
Yeah, it's in Jeremiah 10, 1-5, and it looks like it talks about it being a custom. It doesn't talk about it being like doctrine, or there's no sort of like commandment or anything like that. But yeah, it's Jeremiah 10, 1-5. I don't know what version this is, but it says, "Hear the word which the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, do not learn the ways of the Gentiles. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heavens, for the Gentiles are dismayed at them, for the customs of the people are futile." Oh, so it actually looks like it's talking against the Christmas tree. "For the customs of the people are futile, for one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of his hands of the workman with an axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it would not topple. They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good. Interesting. It also says, verse 8, but they are altogether dull-hearted and foolish. A wooden idol is a worthless doctrine. Yeah. And so it's funny too, because my dad was really not into doing the Christmas thing, but my wife, her family was super big into all the holidays, not because of their meaning, but I think that her dad just wanted an excuse to throw a party. So she's used to always doing like these big Christmas things, and my dad had the opinion about other holidays that he wasn't biased towards, that basically everything in our lives is pagan. So if we try to cut every pagan thing out, then we're going to be left with nothing. So why not just, have the correct understanding of the holiday or the whatever, and then still have the fun? Because that's at least how my dad justified Halloween. He was like, it doesn't matter that that all of this is, it's demons and scary stuff and blood and dismemberment and witches. We're just in it for the fun. Let's just have a good time. Let's eat some candy, watch some movies, whatever.
All right, I found it. I found the actual where the Christmas tree tradition comes from.
Let's hear it.
It's pretty messed up. All right, so the story relates back to Germany and Saint Boniface. In 722, he encountered pagans who were about to sacrifice a child at the base of a huge oak tree. He cut down the tree to prevent the sacrifice, and a fir tree grew up at the base of the oak. He then told everyone that this lovely evergreen, with its branches pointing to heaven, was a holy tree, the tree of the Christ child, and a symbol of his promise of eternal life. God, is that cringy?
Yeah, it's pretty. It is very cringy. But there are so many. There's so many like customs and things that we do that nobody knows the origin. Like the tie, right? The tie, it was just a fancy napkin that people would tuck in their shirt, and how ornate and beautiful your napkin was, like, raised your status at the table. So people would just do these and then eventually they weren't even napkins to use to wipe your face. It was all decoration. And then now what do? You're not even considered dressed nice unless you're wearing that fucking napkin around your neck.
And you gotta tie it properly and everything.
Everything. Yeah. So
do the half Windsor, you're some sort of heathen.
Yeah, half Windsor, get out of here with that shit. We're not letting you in.
All right. Yeah. Anything else we want to hit on with Yule?
I don't think so. I mean, we talked about it a little. I don't know if it was in the last episode or if it was after we stopped recording when we were talking about it. But the birth of Christ can very clearly be tied to Tishri first, which is the Jewish holiday. Tishri is like a month, and it's a fall month. And that's the day that they celebrate. I think it's Rosh Hashanah. I might have that wrong. I think I said that last time. But anyway, it's the day they celebrate the coming of the new king. And coincidentally, wink, that's the day that Christ would have been born, and that's why there were trumpets and celebrations and everything happening in the city during the time, which, as we're reading the Bible, really helps us narrow down the actual time. And then because it was prophesied in the stars when Christ would be born, and that prophecy in the stars is what the Magi, or the wise men, right? The Magi saw, and they were, sort of a group of, like, a weird sect of Egyptians that they studied the sky, and they saw that it was coming, and then that's why they left to go find him. And I think when a lot of people too, they have the picture of like Jesus in the manger with the wise men, but I don't think they found Jesus until like a couple years later, like when he was like a toddler or whatever, right?
Right. They didn't take off and find him like at
for
birth.
a while.
Right.
Yeah, at birth.
Because you have to put into perspective with that, with like the vastness of the Roman Empire at that time, where they were coming from, where Jesus was born, how long it would take them to travel. Plus, they're to a certain extent, they're trying to find a speck of sand in the in the desert.
In the desert.
Like literally trying to find the right speck of sand in the desert. And,
do you know where the new king is?
Yeah.
He should have been born around now.
Yeah.
Any clue where I should go?
Like
Yeah.
nobody sent them a text message like, "Hey, we're here."
Right. Yeah. Pin drop the location. Right.
They
Yeah.
had to actually go hunt and search, and so yeah, like to put that whole thing into perspective and look at it from an actual timeline. Yeah, they weren't showing up at the delivery room with the with gifts,
Yeah. Anyway, based on what they saw in the sky, which is recorded, right? That Regulus lined up with, which is the brightest star of the constellation for Leo, the lion, lined up with Jupiter, the king's star, and they call it every planetary body a star. So when Regulus lined up with Jupiter, and you had Virgo with the moon under her feet, that was the picture that they saw. You can look it up too, but that was the picture that they saw in the sky coming, sort of lining up, and that's when they knew, okay, now is the time, and then they went for their search. Anyway, so using our modern technology, we can look back to when the last time that happened was, and it was September 11th, which I know we had talked about that.
We did talk about this.
Yes, September 11th, 3 BC or 2 BC, depending on which calendar thing you're looking at. That would have been when Christ was born. So
yeah, we did talk about
to wrap up the Christmas thing. We gotta talk about, like, when is the actual time, and then that's when that lines up.
And there are no good pagan holidays around September 11th, so you just got to move on to.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything. Labor Day, that didn't come in, until recently. So
yeah, there really isn't anything around that time of the year.
That's probably what
which would make
Constantine
sense
was thinking.
because, like, that's the actual harvest. So in those with those cultures being very based on nature and the harvest and the seasons and stuff like that, they wouldn't have had time for that sort, for any holidays or celebrations at that time of the year. Like,
they'd have been working.
They're gonna be working their asses off.
Yes.
They don't have time to be getting drunk and having orgies. They got work to do, and if you don't do the work, then you don't eat for the winter. And they're as with any society, they were highly motivated by survival. And
yep, and it looks like Rosh Hashanah lines up. It is the 6th this year through the 8th. So that is the holiday that I was thinking of. Yeah. It's the first, sometimes the second day of Tishri in September. It's marked by the blowing of the shofar, and it begins 10 days of penitence, culminating in Yom Kippur. Yeah, so I had it right. Thank God. But yeah, that's when it was. And then the whole city would have been celebrating the coming king and not knowing that that's the day that he was born, which is cool too, because there's so many things biblically that really line up like this, where everything sort of looks, it's all like cohesive and put together. It's not like random, because if it would have been December 25th, that doesn't line up with anything biblically. Of course, it lines up, with the pagan stuff. It doesn't line up with anything biblically, so it would have been really out of place. But this is sort of how we put it all back together. So those are my closing thoughts on the Christmas thing.
All right. So that gets us into the last holiday that is actually the one that we talked about last time, which is Easter, or in the pagan tradition, Ostara. And Ostara is as with
fertility goddess.
Yeah, as with many pagan traditions, it's a festival of fertility, and which it's spring. It's the planting season. It is it's the spring solstice, and everything's starting to come out, and like life is actually happening. Like, so with Yule, it's the celebration of the new year and the hope of, like, you've hit your winter solstice, and you're coming through the winter, and that spring is coming, that the rebirth and everything is on its way. Well, this is the fruition of that, and you get Ostara, which is like the spring planting season, and this is when we're having our celebrations, because it's new life, it's rebirth, it's everything is coming back alive. It's the celebration of fertility. And that's where all the eggs and everything of that comes.
And the bunny.
It's fertility. Yeah, the bunny.
Because bunnies do what bunnies do, and then you have,
that's why they, call it effing like jackrabbits, is because that's what they do.
Yeah.
So that's where all of that, and even Easter itself, like the name Easter, is sort of born out of it's a different translation of
Aster, which is
Easter's Ostara, which was also pronounced Esther, or Easter. So this one is kind of an interesting one, because as we talked about in the last the last time you and I got together, this is actually the timing of when the death of Christ happened. So it is kind of at least with this one, you don't have that big delineation between when Jesus was actually born versus when we celebrate it. Like this one conveniently kind of happens roughly around that same time of year.
Early spring. Yeah.
Right. Like because the Jewish calendar kind of shifts based on the constellations and stuff like that. There can be some variation, but it still kind of happens roughly in that same time of the year. So at least this one has some like natural lining up between the two that at least makes it seem to make sense to incorporate the one into the other.
Right. I'm sure Constantine was thrilled when he was like, "Oh man, this sort of lines up with the spring equinox. Let's go."
So what are the so we talked about the rabbits and the eggs as far as the pagan tradition goes. Do you know what the justification for those are within Christianity? Like I found
they're completely divorced from any part of the original story. There's no mention of any sort of like eggs or rabbits or fertility or anything like that. The day is an otherwise or the time period is otherwise nothing besides the feast of, or besides Passover, which leads into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Like that's the Jewish celebration of that. And then of course Passover is the angel of death's passing over your home, because that was the 10th plague, right? That was the 10th plague of Egypt from Moses's time, the angel of death. And so the way that they got the angel of death not to stop at their house to take their child or children or whatever is to put the blood on the doors and follow this really specific custom to make sure that happened. And of course the power in the custom was of course in the believing. It wasn't in the action, because the action was symbolic. It was to be a symbol of what was to come, right? So we have the symbolic Passover lamb, and then we had the legitimate Passover. Christ was the Passover lamb. And so that was all just like being baptized, right? So that's even symbolic. There's nothing sort of special about that. In fact, we're even commanded to not be doing that anymore, but to instead get baptized with Holy Spirit and with fire, which is basically just means with Holy Spirit. Not that's the hendiades, to say two things by one, or to say one thing by the means of two. Hendiades is the figure of speech. But anyway, so it's the same kind of thing. So that's the only holiday that sort of lines up with that. But so much of that gets forgotten. It's like we do the entire celebration of Easter of all the pagan stuff, but then we tell ourselves, well, we're doing all the pagan stuff for Jesus, and then while we're doing that, we're not even getting the days right, and we went over that, of course.
Right. And that, like, so I've just been kind of perusing like different stuff, because like the Christmas tree has at least some made up justification for how the tree ties into Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find anything on the eggs. Like the closest thing
Yep.
I could find says that there was supposedly a story that when Mary said that Jesus had come back, she was holding a red egg or something.
Dude, I've read the Gospels so many times. I've never read that Mary had a red egg,
I never saw the point where anything
unless that's
specifically said that Mary was holding a red egg. Like, unless my mind just blocked it out because it didn't cross me as being relevant to the information that I was going through. You know, I mean, everybody is prone to skip words as they read stuff from time to time because your brain automatically filters out stuff that it deems unnecessary. But I'm almost 100% positive there is no mention of a red egg in any of the scriptures.
no. It's got to be like an apocrypha thing or some sort of like extra text. Yeah, it's Mary Magdalene, and it's talking about the first Easter egg, the red egg. But then there's no scripture references at all. There's the 40 best Easter Bible verses, kind of. Doesn't look like it has anything to do with Easter. He is not here. He is risen. Yeah.
Then she throws an egg at the guard and runs off.
Yeah. It doesn't. It just doesn't pan out. But like we said, there's so many things that we do that nobody even really thinks through, like why we do them. Sort of like the shaking of hands. Right, shaking someone's hand is because the way they used to do it was wrist to make sure that you didn't have a knife up your sleeve. That's how they used to shake hands. Or like the salute was from knights raising their helmet, the face shield to their helmet up to greet one another. So that's where the salute comes from. So yeah, it's just so many of those, and of course when it comes to biblical tradition, it's not immune to the world sort of affecting these traditions,
which is an interesting thing. I've had some, I don't know, I've had some issues with some of the behaviors of the church and stuff, talking about like the traditions and the way some of the original things have had pagan traditions co-opted into them, and also talking about Constantine and using the church as a power of the state, stuff like that. Like, a lot of that stuff kind of rubs me the wrong way because I am very scriptural as far as my faith goes, and a lot of that, especially the conservative Christian attitude is not scriptural. And
no, all the heroes in the Bible were basically atheistic, or not atheistic, like anarchists, at least anarchist leaning. I mean, we see that with Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And we see Jesus was killed by the state, like so was Paul, and all these big heroes.
I mean, even David was for becoming a great king. David was actively hunted by the state for the better part of his life.
Right. Yeah. And and David, he had his trouble. He wasn't a perfect guy. He may have murdered a person or two. No big deal, right? But it's interesting too, because
once he got into that position of power, you see how what power does to people, and he's a prime example of that. Like, if anything, the scripture should be a cautionary tale against the state, not something that we should be co-opting into the state.
Yeah, you would think so. I have a buddy of mine that I talk to about things like this a lot, and he's more atheistic leaning. But I was like, all the greatest people of the Bible were people that rejected these positions of authority and told these people that I don't care what you say, you have no authority over me. I care about this, and I think that he'll help me out. But in the case of Nebuchadnezzar, right? They said, even if he doesn't help us, we still won't listen to you. And fuck yeah, that's what I'm based, right? That's what I'm talking about.
That's what every libertarian is supposed to aspire to. It's
Yeah,
like I'm not gonna do what you say, and I trust that it's gonna work out. And even if it doesn't work out, I'm still not gonna do what you say.
right, right. Which is so great, and I think that's one of the reasons that I'm starting to notice like more and more people sort of making their way over to Christianity, especially since it's like the new sort of counterculture to statism, which is the new religion, of course, with which has its hymns and its flags and its symbols and its leaders and it has sins, and it has it has the ways that you can tell other people about their sins. Hey, where's your mask? You don't have a mask, you're not listening to the saints that told us that we need to wear. It's just like it's become this new religion. So like the new cool, like rebellious thing to do is to believe in something rather than to believe in nothing, because turns out that nothing was a vacuum for the that the state filled, and that's become like the new thing. And I don't my younger sister, who's coming to stay with me for a month, so it's going to be fun. She is super lefty, feminist, and 18 and dumb, and she's very like not into religion or anything like that, because my mom had blown it with them, because my mom's out of her mind. But anyway, so she's rejected all that, but then like all the new things that she talks about is like that's just your new that's just your new religion via the state, with all of its creeds and whatnot. And it's going to be, she's gonna be here for like a month, so it's going to be really fun to because I'm not going to be able to keep my mouth shut. Every time I read something, I'm like, man, isn't it great that we have this, so that all these people can die? It's awesome.
You need to just keep a live feed going like nonstop.
I know, of anatomy of the state in the background or something like that. I'm probably gonna have her read it. Just be like, do me a favor. I'll read any book you want, even if it's way longer than Anatomy of the State, which is not very long. It's like 40 pages or something.
Right.
It's like a pamphlet, and I'll read anything you want. I just want you to read this and then tell me what you think. And so
that's like I would make that argument as well. So odds are most people would probably recommend, like if you were to make that bet with somebody, they would probably say, well, I'll read that if you'll read the Communist Manifesto. And then for me, I can be like, yeah, I did that 5 times and I did a whole podcast on it. Like, what do you want to know about that one? Because like I talked about that in the podcast, was like most of the people who are hardcore communists, I would be willing to bet any amount of money you put on it that they've never read anything by Marx. They've never read the Communist Manifesto. They have
or no Lenin. They've read zero Lenin.
Which that's another. We could do a whole other episode on some of this stuff, because that's another gripe I have with Christianity and Christians is there are too many modern day Christians who have only read the little blurbs from the Bible that the preacher puts up on the screen on Sunday morning, and they've never read the whole thing, and they don't have any context for that 2 lines. They didn't read the 7 paragraphs that came before it and everything that comes after it that puts that line into context of what it actually means and what it actually stands for and how it applies to your life and how it applied to that moment in the Bible and in time.
Because these people wrote things to people, right? I mean, Paul wrote a letter to the Romans and to the church at Corinth. That's my biggest thing, when discussing the Trinity, which I am so against, because I'm not a Trinitarian, is like you have to ignore almost all of the Bible to be able to hold a Trinitarian perspective. No man has seen God at any time. And of course that's John 1:18, because everybody likes to quote John 1:1 and then John 1:14, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then John 1:14, and the Word became flesh. And they're like, bam, Trinity. And I was like, well, first of all, that's only 2. Even if you prove Jesus is God, which you can't, that's still only 2. You need to have 3. And going off of John 14, where it talks about the Holy Spirit being the Comforter, that's just personification But you have to ignore so much stuff. But anyway, so after it says, and the word became flesh, 4 verses later, John 1:18 says, and no man has seen God at any time. So and Jesus said, for God is greater than I. I mean, we could go on and on and on, right? Go to my disciples, tell them that I ascended to my Father and their Father, and to my God and their God. So absolutely, you're totally right. You're totally right, and that's why we have. I brought this up, which is incredibly important for anybody that's studying this stuff. And when you think about what you would expect there to be in a Bible or in a book about wisdom or how you should live your life, you would expect to read things like this, which is in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, which says, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." Prove all things. Well, proof requires evidence. It requires study. In the Bible, it talked about the Bereans. They would study the scriptures daily, whether those things were so, whether the things that they had heard could be true, because Christianity was so new. So they had to cross-reference everything with what they understood before. That's really big. And then, of course, you have Colossians 2:8, where it talks about to be aware of the traditions of the world. When you pair things like that with prove all things, it makes it to where the Bible is sort of protecting us against the entropy of these traditions, because that's what it is, right? It's the telephone game. It's, let me tell you this story, and then you tell it, and you tell it, and you tell it, and we all fall victim to that all of the time. I mean, I just posted on Facebook the quote from the latest Substack from Pete Quinones, and when I wrote it, I was like, man, is that exactly how he wrote it? And because I care about things like this, I was like, I'm going to double check. And I had taken what was 2 sentences with no punctuation, and I had made it 1 sentence, was separated with commas. And it doesn't seem like a really big deviation from the original, just, taking 2 sentences, making it 1 and adding a couple commas. It's more of I suppose, a stylistic difference, but it's that sort of entropy that makes it to where now if somebody copies me, they can make it even a little different. And then if somebody copies them, it's a little more different. And then by the end, 10, 20 repetitions deep, it's a completely different story. And so, that's why I wanted to take the extra second, let me make sure I put it in exactly how he said it, especially since I was quoting him about Memorial Day.
But then, talking about that and tying that back into kind of the key topic of this episode is, that's kind of how we end up with the Christmas tradition and the Easter traditions. And even though they're rooted in those pagan Yule and Ostara and those traditions, it's been telephone gamed for the last 2,000 years to the point that people don't get it, and they've forgotten, and they don't, or they don't care.
Yeah, it's usually the don't care part, but even the people that do care, they care more about the symbol than what it symbolizes, which was a big deal. I think that was the overall theme of Jesus Christ Superstar. If you ever see that musical, was Judas was telling Jesus, "You're becoming to matter more than the things that you say." And yeah, it's weird how that game plays. My dad used to tell me this story to illustrate this point, where this little girl goes up to her mom and is like, "Mom, why do you cut the top off the roast before you put it in the oven?" And the mom's like, "Well, that's the way my mom did it." And then goes to grandma and is like, "Why do you cut the top off the roast before you put it in the oven?" And she was like, "Well, that's just the way my mom did it." And luckily for her great grandmother was still alive. So she goes to her great grandmother, "Grandma, why do you cut the top off the roast before you put it in the oven?" She's like, "Well, my old oven used to be so small that the only way I could get it to fit would be to cut it off and then put it in." And it's just like, oh, well, okay, so that makes total sense. And then everybody else afterwards that's been perpetuating this is, kind of an idiot.
Right. Welcome to the Christian traditions.
And that is why we study, because there are so many traps.
That's right.
That have been laid intentionally or unintentionally, and we want our pursuit is the pursuit of truth, and it takes work.
Amen. Well, thank you for joining me. I thought this was really good. Hopefully anybody listening to this gets something out of it. And, if you want to argue with us about it, please let's talk about it, because especially with this stuff, because there is so much history with those traditions and where they came from. It's this stuff is pretty easy to dig into, and there's a lot of information to dig into. I mean, we kind of gave a surface level run through of how they connect and what they're what they are, but you can really get deep into some of this stuff. And I have had a lot of fun in my spiritual journey studying this kind of stuff, which like I've talked about it before. I'm a little more laissez-faire with the things that I read. I've said it before. I've studied the Quran and the Dhammapada. I've looked into all of the different pagan traditions and kind of practices and stuff with the holidays and just sort of in general. I haven't dedicated as much time to like the Eastern religions. I'd really like to look more in depth at like Taoism, but I just haven't gotten to that point yet. But I mean, I feel like every time I look into and research these things, it doesn't cripple or cause my faith to stumble. If nothing else, it enhances my faith and makes me stronger in what I believe.
Of course, yeah. The sharpest swords are made in the hottest fires, right?
That is right. Well, we will do this again. We'll kick around some ideas for what our next topic is going to be, and hopefully here in another couple months we'll get another one.
Hell yeah.
Thanks for joining me.
No problem, man. Thank you.